Hello YouTube. Today I'm going to talk about reactive forms. We're going to go quickly over the page component architecture that I enjoy using with reactive forms and talk about static forms and dynamic forms. The page component architecture is a smart component, which is the page component itself, where you might have your API calls, your form lives there, and you respond to form change events as needed. The component is a dumb component. They're not aware of API calls. The form is passed in as input, and they do mutate the form, but those mutations are immediately available to the parent without having to go through any extra steps. Reactive forms have static components. Those form elements are known at compile time, and they use form group and form control from the reactive form set. And dynamic components are where the form elements are not known at compile time. The number of elements that you're going to need are not known. That needs a form array, and in addition to that, you'll use a form group and form controls as well. And then you finally have a form builder, which just simplifies the creation of these groups and controls and such. So let's look in some code. First of all, Angular has an example code online, which I'll link in the video. Allows you to look at the code and also see a simple example of a static form. Again, you have a profile editor, another example of a static form, except this one actually has a dynamic form option here at the bottom. Notice that those elements, the form itself is serialized right here so you're free to see it. You can see the values, the alias values are separated into different indexes and an aliases array. And as I add new elements, there's new indexes in the array. And finally, there's a form status, which tells us whether or not the form's valid based on the first name, the existence of the first name. So it's just good to know that there is code that Google gave us to see how a form array works. And here's a look at that. I'm not going to go into detail on this one because I have another example. This is a reactive form that I created. It's similar. I actually created this before I knew about this stack blitz, but surprisingly we came up with a similar solution here. I'll put my name here, and then the address line is available. And I'll go ahead and add another address line, and notice that this came up separately, and so on and so on. To put together this magic, we have the entry point, the app component HTML just brings us over to the user details page right here. The user detail page hosts the user and the dynamic address. Note that this code is available, and I'll link this code in the video as well, so you can play around with it yourself. In the code behind the TypeScript file, you have the form builder, which creates the basic form group, and it has a user group and also an array of addresses. Notice that I pass in the form group here is set to form, and I pass in the user group to the static component. There's the form group passed in as an input from the user details page. And then in the HTML, we define that as our top level form group. And then we say our form control name is first name and last name. Going back to that definition here, our group has a form control here defined as first name and last name in the page component, which is again passed down to the input in the user component. And the dynamic address is very similar. In this case, we're passing in the form group, the whole form here. It's a little different there in that we're passing in the whole form as opposed to the user portion of the form. The reason that is because the form group, or the parent of the array, is the whole form itself. So in this case, we define that form group as form, as the form array of addresses, and then any controls that we dynamically add are iterated here in this for loop and indexed with I. Let I equal index. And the form group name here is equal to the I, the index. This part's where things are a little funky and you got to get used to this pattern. But once you are, it's really not that bad. And you can use that to give individual names, unique names to your form controls as you're dynamically generating them. And to add an element to the form control, the dynamic form array that is, you simply push that element into the array. So here we're using form builder again to create a group which just has one form control, the address. We push that into the form array using this getter syntax, and that's it. I default to add a single address line on init for this component, so that's why we saw the first address line already there when on load. And then when I click new lines, we're simply pushing new form groups into the form array. And that just about covers it. We saw how the form value was shown at the bottom. That's just a pipe. We're piping that JSON out to the page. And this is the page component, and DOM component 1, DOM component 2, the dynamic component, and the static component. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned something.